thank you all for coming. And when we begin, we should make an acknowledgement of the traditional owners and guardians of the land, various lands on which we are all meeting and connecting from. Pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and thank them for their custody and guardianship of the land for 65,000 years. We're meeting tonight to talk about the tsunami of awfulness, if you like, that's about to overcome us. We've now having our Brexit moment or our Trump moment, because something that's been going on in liberal democracies for probably now about 20 years, which is that people have lost confidence that liberal democracy can deliver prosperity and security for them. And what they've seen is that they've got poorer and everyone else at the very top has got richer and more distant. In a way, the campaign by Kamala Harris exemplified it, that people who are struggling with 3 jobs were treated to an account of why they should vote for her by all these Hollywood celebrities who were multimillionaires. That didn't go down well, as we know. This is a crisis point where capitalism and the sort of democracy we've tried to attach to it have simply not worked for a majority of people. But they have also been disempowered, and the traditional forms of mobilisation have not been working for them for a very long time. And often it's because those agents of mobilisation have themselves lost touch with the grassroots. So they're feeling betrayed right, left and centre. And the cutting edge of this is particularly in the regions. What people from Gippsland are telling us are things like, Jacinta Allen is blamed for everything, and the Labor Party and the unions are blamed for everything, and Pauline has got the answers, and they don't want to have any further discussion. They certainly don't want facts and evidence to counteract their beliefs. And so what we are left with is this awful situation where we actually can't talk to people because they won't listen and won't talk back and won't talk to us. So that's number one. It's going to the very heart of the sort of politics that we've all been committed to about how do we mobilise people to be able to stand up to very powerful forces. What I want to do tonight is because Emma's not here, she's given me a couple of things she wanted to say, so I'll try and channel her. But I thought we should start with the diagnosis, because Oscar has offered an antidote. And we need to spend some time on the diagnosis, and Kos has in particular been publishing very, very insightful, powerful accounts, which really get inside the head of people feeling neglected, shut out, forgotten, and they have been forgotten. And if they're complaining about politicians not caring about them, well, we could be nasty and say, well, you did go and vote for the National Party all these years, and it has presided over regional Australia being the real locus of poverty in this country, which it is, but that's not very productive or helpful. So really what we need to start doing is looking at the diagnosis, and then the second half of the session we were looking at the antidote. So, Kos, could I ask you to start, please, and summarise where you are in your thinking and findings, and what the disease is, or what the malaise is?
So I think that we need to focus on 2 large significant groups out there in the electorate, and they are behaving differently in a very drastic way. So I'll focus on the first group, which is obviously the one that most people are paying attention to, which is the One Nation constituency. It is not a homogeneous group of Australians. It is not a product of a bunch of Australians suddenly becoming really attracted to right-wing populism. There is a right-wing populist element to it, and that gets Pauline Hanson and One Nation to about 15%. The other 15%, or thereabouts, give or take, is rented. And it's the term I use. And that is that these people have come to support One Nation for reasons that, Janet, you've articulated, and that is people feel like they've been basically let down by the system, that experienced economic decline for well over 20 years, and so on, and they are sick to death of the two-party system, and they have gravitated to her. There are many hours of conversation that can be had as to what tools were used by One Nation to harvest that grievance, but the grievance has been harvested. So that other 15% that's arrived later and that is rented is in a number of different parts. A section of it does come from the coalition. There's no question about that. There's a subsection that comes from individuals who've historically voted for other parties. And there is a section that's come from the Labor Party. But they overwhelmingly also are situated in the outer suburbs of our large cities and the regions across the country. And there is a generational skew to it all. So yes, there are an increasing number of older millennials that are supporting One Nation, but overwhelmingly they are Generation X and older. The other significant element to it all is that they are overwhelmingly individuals who have got a TAFE qualification, who are renting, who have very significant mortgages and experiencing financial stress. They're also individuals who, in particular the regions, and in particular in some states like Tasmania and Queensland and regional New South Wales and regional Victoria, have experienced over, I would say, 30 years, one form of disruption after another. So if you are in your 50s now and you entered the job market at the peak of the 1990s recession, if you didn't go to university, you ended up more likely ending up in some sort of trade or some sort of industry, eventually securing a job. More than likely started saving and accruing money in your late 20s. So again, the entry into that 1990s recession did in a very significant way slow down these people's life cycles. So they entered the housing market probably at the same time as older millennials were entering the housing market. So at the beginning or the middle part of the housing boom, they've over leveraged in very, very significant ways. They, again, as I've stated before, are living in the outer suburbs and regions. They've historically worked in industries which have been slammed to the deck. So timber, abattoirs, small town manufacturing, canneries, agriculture, all these sort of jobs that have experienced contraction or have been offshored. When we come into the cities, that obviously applies to the automotive industry as well. They've gone through the recession, they've stabilized their lives, they've acquired property. Those that were lucky, there are still many of them that are renting. They've got significant levels of debt. They're more likely to have parents who are on the pension and parents who are not self-funded retirees. They're also more likely to have children in their late teens or early 20s who are again going through TAFE education or some form of vocational training, not university. So they are also a generation we define as a sandwich generation who historically are not only experiencing all those challenges that I've articulated, but now having to manage the demands and health demands of their parents and their children. Now, those health demands are important because, again, if we go to regional Australia, the one thing that is very consistent about regional Australia is that if you get sick and you are diagnosed with a serious illness, you have a very different diagnosis than someone who lives in Hawthorn, for example. Getting to a GP, finding a specialist, getting cancer treatment. These are all things that are massively challenging for people in regional Australia. So again, services have declined. And to Janet's point, they've been voting for the National Party for some time. And when people say to me, well, why have conservatives in these constituencies moved to One Nation? So, well, the evidence is there. Their lives have declined in quality. Half of them report to us as choosing not to take out surgery because of fewer regions. 1 in 3 avoid going to the doctor because, again, of cost. The list goes on and on. And so the grievance is real. And they blame the two-party system. They blame the big end of town. That late group that's moved to Pauline Hanson, is driven by that grievance. They're not driven by immigration as an issue, for example. Half of them are pro-choice. So when we survey One Nation voters, half of them tell us they have a view that women should have complete control over their fertility. They do not buy into Hanson's rhetoric in this space, or Barnaby Joyce rhetoric in this space. When we speak to particular women, they will tell us that the reservations they have about Pauline is that she's racist. But they think that the two-party system is so shit and it's let them down that they've got no other option. There's no other product on the shelf for them to choose from to reject the two-party system, as far as they are concerned. So the challenge for the left now, and we're doing significant work across the country, working with a number of NGOs and unions to develop a campaign to challenge her in her rhetoric, is to articulate to these people her background. She did that movement a very significant favour at the National Press Club, where she actually vocalised her history. And that history is one of opposing significant reforms and positive reforms when it comes to workplace relations, minimum wage, raising the pension. She's got very draconian views about women and women in the workforce, and she loudly articulated those. And again, that policy position she took, which was to criticise maternity leave and childcare, has landed pretty badly for the women that moved to her in the last 3 to 4 months. So when we talk to Australians now and we treat them and expose them to this, that is those individuals, particularly that have come from the Labor side, they will overwhelmingly tell us that, well, it looked like she's just another politician. So it shouldn't surprise anyone that over the last, I'd say, 4 weeks, we have seen a softening of her vote, and the ceiling is developing. There's nothing that's propping up that ceiling, and it isn't just her behaviour and her history. That is that who are the non-One Nation voters? There's 70% of them in this country. Remember, the highest she's polled is 30. That means there is a lot of Australians out there who are not voting for her. So those who are not voting for her, they're in a number of different categories. But when we are talking about those who are supporting the parties of the left, whether it's the Greens, whether it's the Labor Party, that scaffolding is held up by 3 main groups. That is Generation Z, that is Australians between the ages of 18 and 28, irrespective of geography, irrespective of education. They're obviously also the most diverse. And of course, going to the issue of diversity, the Australians that speak a language other than English at home, the two-party preferred vote for Labor amongst this constituency now is 70% versus One Nation. To give you a contrast, this same group hands Labor a 55 two-party preferred vote versus the Liberal Party in the years gone past. So we've seen a massive move towards Labor and the parties of the left by these communities. And I expect that to accelerate, and of course one of our senators in the last couple of days, promised to terminate translation services. Anyone who understands how important translation services are, they are very important to, in particular, second and third generation diverse Australians who were born to migrant parents, people of my generation. Our parents who are going through aged care and all sorts of health problems right now, they require those translation services. And so there was a bundle of those people who were planning to vote One Nation. Well, guess what? They're not now. So that's another group. And of course, the other group, which is the kryptonite to One Nation, to One Nation vote, is Australians at the university. Wherever you see large numbers of those Australians, they are not going to be voting One Nation. They are not going to be persuaded. Yes, there's a portion that do, and there's always exceptions, and there's exceptions with all the demographic groups that I talked about. But overwhelmingly, these cohorts that I've just listed are very much against the One Nation constituency. So that's a snapshot of the world where we're at. I would say that there is a ceiling on the One Nation vote. We still have 2 years before a federal election, although in Victoria, this will be tested writ large come November. We will see what happens when that vote is treated and when there is a counter narrative put out there by particularly the union movement and others as to whether that vote holds up or not. And I would say that the vote is not going to be as robust as it is now. It will fall off, not in a very significant way, but in enough places where One Nation's advances are limited. Although I would say that unless something changes, we should all expect that in November, One Nation will win a lot of seats in regional Victoria.
Well, thank you, Kos. Oscar, do you want to start now, please?
Sure. Thank you very much for organizing this, Jana, and thanks, Kos, for sharing those really important reflections. I am here to talk a bit about how the Victorian Union movement is thinking about this issue, how we're responding to this issue, and what we see as some solutions to confront this. Australia has come very late to a trend that is unfolding all around the world. We're seeing formerly two-party systems with a sort of center-left and a center-right block break down into three different camps where you have a left, a center-right, and a far-right. When this happens, specific sections of the electorate are driving this shift. The rise of the far right as a sort of electoral phenomenon has a really strong occupational element to it. So whenever we've seen far right parties break through and entrench themselves, it's because they've been able to make really strong inroads into the groups that Kos has been talking about. So, people with a vocational education, production workers, service workers, small business owners, retirees. We see the union movement and the labor movement more broadly as having really unique capacities to take on far-right ideas and far-right propaganda at its root and branch. When we think about the far right in Australia, let's look back at the last 10, 15 years, and we'll see a series of events that were sort of catalytic for far-right activity in this country. In 2014, you had the mosque opening in Bendigo. In 2020, you had the COVID lockdowns. In 2021, you had the vaccine rollout. In 2023, you had the voice to parliament. And in 2025, you had the net zero debate. Each of these things involved the far right identifying a new enemy, a new threat to the Australian way of life. And if we spend all our time as a movement, as progressives, sort of debunking each of these anxieties individually, we're not really going to get anywhere, because the far right's propaganda, it's a play, and the characters that are cast are changed constantly. One day it's transgender people, or it might be Muslim migrants, or it might be Jews, or it might be progressive public school teachers. If we want to take them on, we have to look at the underlying function of all of these narratives. What purpose are they all serving? What do they all have in common below the level of who is explicitly being targeted? The way we see it is each of these narratives, each of these moments of far-right activity, they serve to create an illusion of common interests between groups that don't have interests in common. Who makes up the far-right political coalition all around the world? We see downwardly mobile people in underserviced, disadvantaged, neglected areas in the regions, in the periphery, in the outer suburbs. We see high street small business owners. We see mothers in the outer suburbs. And we see mining magnates and technology billionaires and media moguls. These groups of people, these camps, do not have coherent interests. So the way the far right has to work is it needs to supply a constant influx of folk devils, of outer boundaries for their community to create a sense of identity where there isn't one there. Why I believe the labor movement, the union movement, our story of society, why I believe it is a really promising way out of this for a lot of people, is it doesn't stoop down and engage in the sort of mud of the culture war debate. It transcends it. It cuts right through it. All of these far-right narratives we've heard about for decades, all the way since the early 20th century, they can effectively be distilled into a single sentence, which is that cultural difference equals interest difference. If I have a different culture to someone else, I don't have shared interests with them. And you can sort of slot in different cultures in this basic formula. The basic proposition of the labor movement, of labor politics, is all who work have interests in common. No matter where you come from, no matter what you do, what language you speak, all who work have interests in common. That addresses, that refutes the far-right propaganda system right at its kind of origin point. I think we've been running at TradeSol. We've spent about 18 months looking into this issue because we've anticipated for a while that Australia was overdue for a moment like this. And after the 2025 federal election, when we saw the Liberals, they lost their leader, the coalition broke apart, and their sort of credibility as a right-wing party of government began to deteriorate. We all started turning in the union movement in TradeSol, and we thought this is a real time where a far-right party could really take off. we've been thinking about this for a really long time, and now we're at a level where we are doing a lot of focus group, we're doing a lot of polling, we're doing a lot of research. And what we're finding is, for those One Nation voters who are there out of a sense of grievance, pain, despair, anxiety about the future, frustration about being abandoned by institutions and by democratic politics, for those people who have been drawn to One Nation, it is very powerful if you can affirm these people's hardship, if you can say, we understand that you have been left behind, you are right to feel this way, this has happened, and identify who in society is really profiting off of this. I think that our experience has been that there are some people who are too far gone. There are people who, in the COVID-19 pandemic, especially in Victoria, were really significantly materially affected, and that pulled them into subcultures that of, conspiracy theories, fundamentalist ideas, sort of diehard racist, anti-Semitic beliefs. These people, more often than not, we can't reach them. But they are vastly outnumbered by a much larger group of people for whom One Nation represents a vote against the status quo. And for these people, I think our story of society, our story that sees, we in the labor movement, we don't just look at democracy as sort of one happy, cohesive family. We talk about interests. We talk about working people needing someone to fight for them. We talk about, entrenched and vested interests that need to be held accountable and need to be challenged by workers. That story is effective. And if we can get it to people, it can speak and it can meet them on the same level that far-right language does. I see far-right and labor movement ideas existing in a kind of symmetry to one another. The far-right mythologizes politics. We bring in the material. The far-right isolates. We bring the collective. The far-right turns injury into grievance. The labor movement turns injury into agency. I think that the circumstances we're living in politically at this point in the 21st century could be extraordinarily receptive and fruitful to our movement and to our story of society and to our program for people, or it could serve the far right. It could really go either way. But it seems evident that one thing's for sure, and that is that status quo politics of the last few decades, in which we've seen institutions become highly professionalized, highly cartelized, mass participation has been left out, working people don't have access to a meaningful civic identity and a political voice and an opportunity to learn and to exercise the sort of skills that you need to be a democratic citizen. And, that whole system has reached its endpoint. And we're now staring down the barrel of an authoritarian, ethnic nationalist, dark future that many other countries have succumbed to. But I honestly have a lot of hope, because I see, as I said, I think this whole circumstance is also a fantastic opportunity for us to make an argument for structural change that's been long delayed. And I think the federal budget, especially, is exactly the kind of thing that the times are ripe for. Really looking forward to hearing what everyone here is thinking and any questions that you might have about Antidote or the sort of specific things that we're working on.
Thank you, Oscar. Yes, you do cheer us up. And I'm just even thinking of one of the things that's relevant to the problems about multiculturalism at the moment, that the reason that Australia, which had been a very typically racist country, everybody was racist before the Second World War, and that the country that had been bonded and formed as a nation by White Australia policy, that was the most powerful glue that from Federation, turned into a multicultural country by the fact that a Labor government bringing in mass immigration from non-British people did a deal with the union movement that the refugees would be paid exactly the same as the old Australians. And that immediately removed the core source of tension and distrust amongst newcomers and people who are already there. And multiculturalism was built on the shop floor of the Ford factory. It was built in the tea room of the Women's Hospital. It was built in the railways. And it wasn't built and started when people in North Balwyn discovered that they preferred coffee, cappuccino, to a cup of tea. And that's where it began, with real relationships and people sharing their lives in the streets and in the workplaces. And that the union movement, above all, has built multiculturalism. And, the last state conference, it's just very moving to see all of these people getting up, speaking for their union about their particular emotion they want to address. And you've got a whole tribe of people who are getting up there to speak and having a voice. We are about giving everyone a voice. And when you've been through the ringer, I mean, the reason that Emma Dawson was particularly sorry that she couldn't connect with you tonight was that her family left Lancashire, Rochdale, as the whole industry world there was collapsing, and the mills that her family worked in were closing. And they came to the Latrobe Valley, and all of that, it started to all close down. So they went through it twice. So you're the front line. You've been there, and as have people in Doveton and Broadmeadows, and Old Brunswick, so they lost all their jobs there, and now they've got all these young people who work for the Labor government, don't they? And they're going to lose their jobs in the next 3 months. So we are in for an historic moment, and Oscar and Kos are absolutely right. If you look back, they're the moments that people have grasped and said, all right, things are really bad, but this is our chance. And we've got to have hope for that. And I think we've got to be able to present to other people that there is a picture of the future, because the thing that distinguishes young people who are suicidal and commit suicide is that they have reached a point where they can't imagine the future. And if you can't imagine the future, you can't go on. And that's what we've got to do, is to start helping people to paint pictures of a future that they see themselves in, and people, their friends and their family in, where they can see life being meaningful and working, and life actually surviving, because I think they also feel very threatened by the ecological crisis. So, Oscar, thank you so much. Thank you for this wonderful pamphlet. There's a link to it on the page which you got your ads, or email I sent to you. If anybody else wants to have a link to be able to download it and read it, just let me know. And there's a link. I'll have a link to it on our website. We've been cheering up our website a bit with a few more things. So they're all the films that we did successfully of past events are there. We've now uploaded our new Mythbuster series of things to give you some scripts to talk to in the election campaign, and our 101 plus reasons to vote Victorian Labor. So they're up there for downloading. And you will also be able to download Antidote, read it, tell people about it. And can you join me in thanking Oscar and Kos in absentia for an absolutely splendid talk, and to be giving us inspiration and hope for the future. You've cheered a lot of old people up.
Thank you all for having me. Have a lovely evening. Thank you, everyone.